no-code data syncing. We'll keep this super casual. So feel free to stop me in the middle of any of this, but basically just table of contents here. I'll go through my background, difference between automation and syncing. I think that's just sort of a key thing to get out of the way here, since I think everyone here is probably pretty familiar with the term syncing, but it gets a little confusing with all these different automation tools. We'll go through sort of a high-level overview of categories of no-code data syncing, what's available today, and then go through each one of them. And just high level there, you can see them. It's automation tools, native integrations, ETL, vertical sync, and then finally what I'm calling here true data sync, but we can probably come with a better term there. And we'll wrap up just with what's next. And with that, let me go ahead and start here. Okay, cool. So just a little bit on my background to start. So I am the co-founder of Whalesync, which I mentioned before. We are building a two-way real-time data syncing tool that is you're able to use completely with no code. Prior to starting that company, I was a product manager for a few different startups, but on the side, I've just been a no-coder for many years. So I was using Wix and WordPress and all those tools back in sort of the ancient days, and eventually, upgraded to Zapier and Bubble and Webflow, of course. And let's see, yeah. So there's a couple things I built, including a Slack app. So to get into the first thing, automations versus sync, want to just draw that distinction. So what we consider automations is sort of Zapier, Parabola, Make, right? These tools that let you create if this then that statements. So you might set up a app that says if a user submits a waitlist form, then send them an email and ping me in Slack, right? And so you can do some really simple things with that, but you can also do really complex things by chaining together those automations. And so, huge fan of these automation tools, and I think that everyone's probably pretty familiar. Data syncing is basically a little bit different, and so again, it gets confusing because a lot of automation tools and other tools call it data syncing, but we define that as actually sharing a set of data between two tools. So for example, you might take an Airtable database and sync that with your Webflow CMS. And so anytime you change data in Airtable, it syncs over to Webflow. Anytime you change data in Webflow, it syncs back over to Airtable. That's what we would consider data syncing. It is, and we'll get into the details later, but it is, you cannot create the same sort of logic that you would in automations, but it does the actual act of mirroring data between two or more sources really, really well. So with that out of the way, some high level categories here. When it comes to no-code data syncing, there are basically 5 areas that we see as sort of the options, and tons of different tools, probably way too many than that we could list out here today. But those 5 categories being automation tools on the left, native integrations is the second one. So you're probably familiar with, let's say, Airtable has what they call extensions. Notion has their own set of integrations, and so they will connect data, let's say the Figma integration, right? Or they had just launched a Jira integration with Notion that'll pull Jira tickets into your Notion database, and that's sort of a native built-in integration. ETL, that's extract, transform, load. We'll talk about that a little more. That's more of a developer tool. Vertical sync, which we'll get into as well. That might be something like Noble, if you guys are familiar with that. And then finally, true data sync. So anyway, I'll go into each one of these 5, but maybe I'll just pause for a second. Any questions so far, or anything that you guys want to talk about up here?
I do have a question. I was going to ask, is this 5 categories something that crops up in general, or did you sort of group things this way whilst you were thinking through the topic?
The latter. I think with a lot of these things, they end up overlapping a lot, and so no one wants to be put into a category. And so this was doing my best to try to pull out what might be a fair way to break it up.
Cool. And I personally don't know the difference between the horizontal and vertical label. Are you going to go into that?
Yeah, I can. And so let me mention it right there. Maybe the 3 labels here. So no-code developer, I think that one's pretty straightforward. And yeah, same with one way, two way. So horizontal, vertical. The idea here is that you take something like Zapier, which has 4,000 different integrations. It syncs data, but it lets you do it across really any set of tool, horizontally. Whereas, let's say Noble, right? That would probably be more of a vertical sync, right? So it's literally only between Airtable and Webflow. And so other vertical type tools, which we can talk about in a bit, might only sync data between financial fintech apps, right? So like that's vertical, whereas like Make, right, is a horizontal tool. You can sync across any type of app.
So you feel like when you say horizontal, it sounds like you often referring to like a more diverse array of things that you can link together.
Yeah, and it's sort of a term that goes outside of the concept of data syncing, right? Just in general, if you are sort of a vertical, if you're a vertical focused product, you are focusing on like a very specific category of things, whereas horizontal is more broad.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Nice. Cool. So continuing on, just again, so I'll go through each of these 5 categories. Automation tools. So just to get into that, we already talked a little bit about it, but Zapier, Make, Parabola, these kind of tools are built for no-coders. Obviously, certain ones are a little more dev focused, maybe N8N if you guys are familiar with that. But in general, they're meant to be used without having to write code. That being said, they do sync data, and by sync, I mean they really automate data, in one direction. You can, of course, set up multiple one-direction automations to try to mimic the idea of two-way sync, but it's not what these tools are built for. And then another one, again, these are really, really horizontal. So even something, let's say like Tray.io, if you're familiar with that one, has tons of integrations, but of course, Zapier being the leader, I think actually it's like 5,000 integrations now. It's just a very, very broad set of things. Again, so great for automations. They're super simple to get started. These tools are really powerful. You can build, again, really complex logic by chaining things together and actually just get a ton of work done. So big fan for a lot of things. What they're not great for is data syncing, especially two-way. They don't keep state. And so by that, like a Zap will say, if someone submits a form, then send that data to Slack, but it doesn't actually keep track of that data. Once it's been sent, Zapier is done with it. And so because it doesn't hold on to that state, it actually makes it very hard for it to keep multiple sets of data in sync. It just doesn't know what's in them. And then another one, if your data is changing constantly, so Zapier, Make, these tools tend to run on a pricing system where you are essentially being charged by how many automations run. And so if your data is changing all the time, that can get super expensive and just become kind of crazy and inefficient. And so again, other tools are better if that's the type of thing that's happening for you. Native integrations. Okay, so we talked a little bit about them already as well. These are mainly one way. There are some that are two way as well, but we're talking about Coda packs, Notion, and a lot of different tools. They'll build sort of a one-off integration. Even let's say Linear, if you're familiar with the project management tool, it has a integration with GitHub and GitLab, where if you change the status of a GitLab issue, it'll update your issue in Linear. And so these native integrations are, again, generally you don't need to know any code for them to work. They are typically, again, one way, sometimes two, and will work with the tool that they're built in. But most of these tools don't have time to build hundreds of different integrations. It's usually a handful of them, so it's fairly vertical. And so yeah, in terms of what they're great for, they're amazing. If someone has built a really good native integration, that is probably the best thing you can do, right? You don't have to leave your app, you don't have to pay for a new tool. Things tend to work. Obviously, the goal of those is to be really simple. If it's already working in the tools you use, that's great. And especially if you're using, again, if you're in Linear and they happen to have a GitLab or a GitHub integration, use that tool, that's terrific. But they're not as great at, oh yeah.
I'm so sorry. I should have waited till you got to the end of the second column. I wanted to really quickly ask what the little orange icon was in the previous slide.
Oh, sure. Yes, I'll come back after this. Let's say, oh, this is Coda.
Coda. Okay, cool. Just making a
It is cool. So Coda, just as a side note, is sort of like Notion and Airtable, a combination of the two. It's like a more database focused version of Notion. But yeah, so just in terms of, yeah, what it's not as great for, typically they're not two-way sync enabled, again, because it is hard to build two-way sync. It takes a lot of engineering effort. And if you are Airtable or Notion, right, you're not your core competency. You're probably not going to want to spend all the time to build that. But, it's really good for bringing data into your tool. Typically, it's not as great for pushing data out. So if you take Airtable, they have a sync, they call it Airtable sync. It's a native integration. They pull data from, let's say, Salesforce into your Airtable app. And that works really well. It's great. If you want to move data out of Airtable somewhere else, not as great. And then finally, of course, yeah, like I mentioned, there's typically only a limited number of these. Moving on. Okay, so ETL. This one I wouldn't be surprised if people are less familiar with. So just pause me if you need anything here. But basically, what that stands for is extract, transform, load. These are data pipelines and something that developers typically use. So if you are at a larger company, it is very likely that they use something like Fivetran, which is the middle logo here, to basically take data from all of the tools that they're using already, like Salesforce or HubSpot or wherever else, Stripe, and use a data pipeline to pull it into what is called a data warehouse. And so it is very much, these are developer tools. They are becoming more no-code friendly, but really they're not meant for no-coders. They sync data in big batches one way, so it's not really for a two-way live sync, but they're really good because they typically, if you are trying to do analytics and whatnot, because they typically have tons of integrations. So yeah, just to, again, if you're pulling data into a data warehouse, these tools are great. Oh yeah. No, please, I love this.
What would you say is the difference between a data warehouse, as you put it, and a database?
Yeah, so a data warehouse is a type of database that is meant to store tons and tons of data. And so, like, have you ever heard of Snowflake?
No.
Okay, so Snowflake is a multi-billion-dollar company. They are sort of the leader in data warehouses. And so, yeah, basically the idea is that you dump tons of data from everything, like way more than a typical database can handle, into this warehouse. And then from there, you can run analytics on it. So that's like a very typical stack for a larger company is you have all your apps, you use an ETL data pipeline to push data into this warehouse, which is this basically just gigantic dumping ground of a database. And then you run analytics on that data once it's there.
Cool, thanks.
Oh yeah, no worries. So yeah, exactly. Basically, it's great for if you are a developer at a big company and you want to do, exactly that. It is not as great for no coders, for very early stage startups. If you're small, you probably don't need to go through the hassle of building data pipelines and running a data warehouse. And again, it's not really meant for sort of real-time refreshed live data. It's meant for data that you can store and then run analytics on. Cool, so two more here, vertical sync. So this one, again, I think Noble, if everyone's familiar with Noble, if not, let me know. But Noble is a tool that syncs data between Airtable and Webflow. It's built by the FinSuite team, if you're familiar with them. And so this is just a good example of they saw a very specific verticalized problem of people have data in Airtable, they want that data to be in the Webflow CMS. They built a tool for that. And so typically these tools, at least in the no-code space, tend to be for no-coders. Here at the bottom is a Notion Google Calendar sync. For example, there's a small team, or I'm not even sure, it might be a single person that built that. So it makes a two-way sync between your Notion and Google Calendar space. So some are two-way. Most of these are one-way, and of course, by definition, they are vertical.
Do you think that you're seeing?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that this is a space that you're seeing the most kind of, I don't know, indie growth, if that's the right way to phrase it, of just like really small, like people solving one really specific problem, as opposed to large companies, starting out of this?
100%. It's a really, I think, ripe area for those indie developers, because if you take like, anything here, right? It is a very specific problem that, like, let's say Zapier could sort of solve, right? People have been building Zaps between Airtable and Webflow before, it sort of solves it, but if someone specializes in it for that vertical area, they can make it better. But if you take, let's just say, Airtable Webflow, you're probably not building a gigantic like venture-backed $100 million business on that, but someone could make a living building it. So yeah, I think for sure we've seen like tons of different indie developers make like one-off connections between two tools.
And then maybe what ends up happening is this either gets acquired or gobbled up or built in, and this functionality gets turned into a native integration that you talked about earlier.
That would be a nice transition. I like that. If anyone from Airtable or Webflow is watching, you're giving them a good idea there. But yeah, so anyway, that's that. And I think exactly like you mentioned there, like if as a user, if you enjoy working with small teams, if you enjoy working with indie developers, like this is a good opportunity to do that. And certainly, yeah, if you have just a specific use case between these two tools, like being able to use a tool like that is great. On the flip side, like obviously they're limited, right? You just can't use a vertical Airtable Webflow sync or Notion Google Calendar sync to do everything that you could in Zapier, right? And typically these are not two-way sync tools, right? These are one-way. And it also just, if you have one of these for every possible use case, then you could end up with a lot of different tools, right? If you're using different ones for every combination. So that would be the downside. And so finally, to bring it all home here, true data sync. Again, this is not a real term here, just trying to put a different category around it, is the idea that you're actually creating a two-way sync between multiple apps. And it's not just between one-to-one vertical sync, but across multiple sets of tools. And so again, the ones that exist here, we have Whalesync, which is my company. Unito is another tool in the space. These are built for no-coders. They are two-way. And I put it here between vertical and horizontal, and that both of these tools are trying to become horizontal tools, but they certainly don't have, we for sure, and Unito as well, don't have the breadth of integrations that a Zapier or Make has. So working its way over to horizontal. In terms of the good and bad, so on the good side, certainly, look, if you're trying to do two-way sync, they're just, of the other four categories, there aren't ones that really do it well. If you need real-time updates, comparing this to, let's say, ETL, like I mentioned, which is more about running analytics, those are batch updates that happen every hour or every 5 minutes at the most. Whereas with a true data syncing tool, this is live updates between apps. If you have lots of data changing all the time, again, they typically don't charge or at least we don't charge in the way that Zapier does per action or per automation. And so you can have thousands of records changing every day and not have that burn a huge hole in the wallet. And again, if you are doing this, works out really well if you're a team that does work in multiple tools. So if you're using Airtable and Notion or Linear and Asana, right, and your team is not all in one space, being able to keep those two sets of data live all the time and sharing across the two apps is really helpful. What they're not as great for, I guess, two things that we talked about before is if you're trying to build your own custom logic, right? These sync tools are meant for data syncing. They do that really well, but they don't let you, completely customize logic in the way that you could with Zapier or Make. And they don't have that long tail of integration. So you don't have the handful of integrations that are available today, or even, eventually, we'll have hundreds of integrations. It probably will not compare to the 5,000 that Zapier has at the moment. So those are kind of the two downsides there. And so finally, I put a big caveat here in the top left-hand corner because these types of charts are generally something you should take with a grain of salt because they can tell any story you would like. But for the sake of this presentation, two-way versus one-way and no-code tools versus developer tools, you can kind of see the split here, which is there are, for no-coders, a ton of tools in the one-way no-code space between the automation tools and the vertical sync tools. I mean, there really are just a ton of options, and it's exciting to see. And then sort of in the other polls in the corners there, you've got the more developer-focused ETL and reverse ETL tools, and then sort of the true data sync tools up there on the right. And so just to wrap it up, what is next? basically, our hypothesis, this is just our best guess. What happens next is that all these tools are just going to continue to get better and plug the holes that I talked about. So everything that was in the red column on the right side is going to be slowly going away, which is, again, as a no coder myself, is just a very exciting thing to see. So if you look at the automation tools, like, they are going to become even more flexible. They're going to let you have more logic. Eventually, they might support things like two-way sync, which would be cool. The native integrations, right? Like Airtable, Notion, they're only going to build more of them, and more tools are going to build their own integrations. And so they're just going to be better ways to bring data into your own apps. The ETL tools already are trying to become more and more no-code friendly. Again, they are built for developers, and they may not become true no-code tools. But if you are maybe someone that is technical or used to working with a little bit of code, they could become more of an option. The vertical sync ones, as you kind of mentioned, Kyle, like, more and more of these products are going to enter the market. More indie developers. It is just a place that's really great for people to jump in. And then finally, on the true data sync side, we certainly, and I imagine Neato and other tools as well, are just going to build more of these integrations. So the idea that you can't use a tool because it doesn't have the integrations you need will slowly become less of a problem. So with all of that, I will pause. I hope that wasn't too much of me just joining on, but that was helpful.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I have like 10.
Oh, amazing.
So let's say, just to like go back to one of the screens where you just have all 5 verticals right there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got a situation where you're doing something in your company, or you've got some sort of a need. You're building something. What's your thought process when you're deciding what tool to use? I think everyone's probably got theirs. A lot of it is probably like what you're comfortable with, but curious, if you could kind of lay out a process that, like, let's say you had one tool in each one of these that you were comfortable with, how would you pick?
Yes. Okay, so I'll start with the easiest part here, and then we can kind of work through it. But so first of all, just the middle one here on ETL. Basically, it's a very specific use case. If you are a developer and you're trying to do analytics, like, amazing data pipelines, boom. If not, assuming you're any sort of a builder, no coder, that's not your use case, we can just strike that to the side. So the way that I would kind of work through it is exactly like you said. I think I'd start with one am I most comfortable with, right? And so that's likely going to be something on the left side here, which is this something really simple I can build in Zapier or whatever tool I'm already using? Does this app have a native integration that can solve my use case, right? And if it does, like, that is awesome. If Airtable, Notion, Webflow, Coda, whatever has built a native integration like that works, amazing. I think as you start to do those things and it breaks down, right? So like, the very common thing is, I don't want to create an automation. I don't want to create a little bit of logic. I actually want to truly connect 2 sets of tools. I want the sets of data to be the same. Then I'm looking over the right side. And so obviously, like, if the use case calls for true two-way sync, like, the ones all over to the right are probably a good option. If it's something a little simpler, then some of the vertical sync tools might work well.
So if you need true data redundant, like, that's almost the threshold is, do I need redundant data in multiple systems that are going to be back and forth a lot? Then I go right into this true data sync. Otherwise, if I don't really need that, and it can be more one way or it's more simple, then I probably look to the left.
Yes, and I'll caveat that all with, like, that is a very data-centric way of thinking about it, whereas I think most people probably think about it more in a use case sense. So like, just to give you an example, let's say you have a blog on your Webflow site, right? Which is super common. Maybe you're not thinking about, well, do I need one-way or two-way sync? Like, what you might be thinking about is, I have this blog in Webflow, and I now have hundreds of posts, and it's become a pain in the neck to deal with the Webflow CMS and manage all of this information. And so you're thinking, all right, so now what do I do, right? At that point, you might come across or realize that Airtable is a better database. It's a better way to manage hundreds of pieces of blog posts. And so now at this point, what do you really want? Are you trying to create some sort of logic between Airtable and Webflow? Not really. you really just want Airtable to be the back end for your Webflow site. And so that's the case where you're going to look on the right. Whereas if your use case is more like, I like form submissions on my Webflow site to go into my Slack, like I want to architect the logic, I'm looking on the left side.
I see. Great. Rachel, fire away.
Well, you got me thinking about the use cases for maybe. I suppose maybe I should start by saying, are there obvious use cases for the two-way sync? I mean, I feel like you just gave us one example, but I don't know whether you have any others up your sleeve, because my mind kind of went to login and users information, and then the idea that you would have some kind of personalized user interface according to user data that's specific to them, and so you might make those changes. And I don't know, does that make sense? I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, no, so just similar to any automation tool, right? The use cases are super broad. It's hard to nail down and say these are the only things that Zapier is good for, let's just say, because it can do so many things. But just to give you a couple, obviously the blog post running, like a CMS, right, is a really obvious one. Another one is, let's say you have a CRM, right, with customer data, so HubSpot, Salesforce, et cetera, right? You may want to use have that information in HubSpot, but also want to view it in Notion, right? So for example, we spoke with a team that basically the team has all their customer information in Salesforce, but doesn't want to use Salesforce because the UI is very slow. And so they'd rather stay in
Someone
Notion.
doesn't want to use Salesforce?
Yeah, shocker.
We're coming back around to that, but
that's one. And then the other one is just across team collaboration, right? So if you have a marketing team that, let's say, uses Asana, and then you have a product team that uses Linear, if they're collaborating on a product launch, right? They want the tasks, as the task gets updated in Linear, to update their Asana board, or vice versa. And so that's another area where sort of true two-way sync is really helpful.
I can see e-commerce, like your products.
That's not, by the way, so e-commerce, Shopify, Airtable, right? I know there's a vertical sync tool out there for that. I think it might be, I forget what it's called, but so another one, exactly. I have thousands of e-commerce products. I don't want to manage it in Shopify. I'd rather manage it in Airtable or some other database tool.
Going back to the Webflow blog Airtable example, in that particular case, you've got two things, and the two-way sync is the information going from here to here, and then the information going back from here to here, and then so on and so forth. Does Whalesync at the moment have a system that allows you to have Airtable plus different places where the two-way sync is happening, or is that?
What do you mean different places, different Webflow sites?
Well, kind of the way that you mentioned that the team, you don't want the team to go into Salesforce, so you're kind of picking and choosing that maybe some of that information goes into Notion. Could you have your Webflow site hooked up to the same Airtable base so that you have data sync happening from...
Can you share it between 3 tools instead of just 2 tools? Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that question. So as of today, no, it's between these two, but we've spent a lot of time to make sure that on the back end, in terms of the way we built this, it can handle 3 or more, 3-way, 4-way, 5-way syncing, right? So yeah, between Airtable, Webflow, and Notion, and Intercom, let's just say, right? For whatever reason you want to connect all those tools. So in the future, we will be enabling that. It's just it's not there yet.
For a second there, I thought you were going to make a big product announcement, like as of today.
Yeah,
as of today, you can do this.
Now you mentioned it.
Oh man, yeah, that would have been nice.
No, but it's recognized as a future pathway.
It's 100% where we want to go, and for exactly because that unlocks a lot of really interesting things.
So, do you? I have tried some of the things like the vertical sync. I love the indie. I love the indie inspiration. I love people solving those problems and going after it. I have found for me, those are good solutions for like, I need to do this thing today. And I found this thing and I went through it and I did it. Okay. And it worked and it did what I needed. But I've had some trouble where it's like, I did it today, but then 6 months from now or a year from now, Airtable's changed, Webflow's changed, Intercom's changed, HubSpot's changed. All those things have changed. And I'm making up tools here. I'm making up indie, builds.
Sure.
But my point being is, it's hard for indie developers, like people who are doing this kind of like on their free time or trying to get something off the ground. It can be hard to keep up with the change of pace of the other tools. And so sometimes I've seen it where I have set something up and then 6 months later I go back to use it. It's like, oh shoot, that isn't working right now. Like I thought, and so, I mean, it's getting, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I think native integrations are better than vertical sync, but I think you said that in your presentation, but I'm curious if anyone else has had similar situations where you're like, I've tried using stuff and it's worked, but or I've tried things and they just haven't worked. Question for the group, really.
Well, it's always struck me as being, it's kind of a big startup dream to become integrated into the tool of choice, correct? Like, I mean, people look for niches in functionality in order to be able to be the solution that then gets bought out. Like, so I hear this. I saw something on Twitter where someone said, if you're looking for a startup idea, just read like the support forums for like common platforms, and then provide the solution and wait for them to buy it from you or something like that. It's not strictly related to like what you were talking about, but I can sort of see why little teams, disjointed teams of people with a passion would end up not necessarily being a long-term solution, because it might not be their long-term plan to uphold that tool for the rest of time.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. And like you said, these tools do evolve. And so it is, it takes that is the one thing that is a vertical tool could potentially do is keep up, because they, in theory only have to keep up with two. Yes. But even that, you're right, it can still get unwieldy over time.
Yeah. The other question I was going to ask is, do you feel like there's a natural kind of symbiotic learning between any of these verticals? Like, if you know automation tools, you can pretty much figure out a lot of these native integrations, or if you know this, or are they kind of all, is there overlap with all of them, or are there any that are really complementary to each other from a learning standpoint?
Yeah. So I think like if you understand the automation tools, it will make the vertical, certainly the native integrations, I think will probably be a breeze, or if they're not, then they're poorly built. But let's just if you take the vertical, the automation tools, right? Like we almost think of them as like the low, like a programming language, right? Like if you know how to build with Make, you're even though you're no coding, you're building your own logic and you're creating things. And so vertical sync tools, and certainly true data sync, is sort of like one layer up, where you don't have to do as much of that thinking. And so, I would say, like, if you can learn the automation tools, then the ones on the right should be a breeze.
And then I've even seen, the three that you showed were Parabola, Make, and Zapier. I think that there's even a learning curve, difference between those three as well. Zapier, I think, being the gateway drug to this whole mess. But
that's spot on.
I'm kind of interested. I feel like in your efforts to be modest, we spent very little time talking about your background, but I'm wondering if there's an interesting pathway that led to you being this, I don't know,
sure,
founder of a cool two-way no-code tool. Like, did you hop from any of these categories and then like find the way?
Yeah. So just at a very high level, right? I truly sort of stumbled into no code, probably in a similar way that a lot of other people have, which is I wanted to build products. I didn't know how to write code. And before that was a term, it was just, oh, like this WordPress thing makes this possible, or Bubble, like, you know, I can actually build an app. And so just was building them on the, very like a typical in the no code world, I think, building little things on the side and learning how to use this. In terms of getting to Whalesync, I did the classic Airtable Webflow through Zapier thing. So like I had a Webflow site or a couple Webflow sites that I wanted to connect to Airtable, watched the YouTube videos on how to connect it with Zapier, and was, oh my God, this is really painful. And I loved Zapier and I loved Webflow, I loved Airtable. Like, why is this so hard? And it was not really meant, Zapier, I felt like I was using Zapier in a way it wasn't meant to be used. And so that happened. I didn't think about it again for another year. And then I met my co-founder, who, just a very quick background on him, because he's great. He was a software engineer at Google, previously started a no-code website builder for restaurants back in 2012. So really, really a long time ago in the no-code world. And he was exploring the no-code space again. And we kind of met and found this problem that other people were just kept telling us about, was really this, like, showing us these crazy 20-step zaps to do things that we thought should be much simpler to do, and ultimately felt like we could make it easier.
So you started out with your zap and you just were bringing in a simple text field, and then you did a rich text field, and it was a little harder. And then you were like, I want to do a reference field. And
there you go.
Like, nah.
Yes, Connor Finlayson had a 30-step plan to do it, but Zapier didn't make that easy.
I love, in my brain, I've been thinking about, like, there's all these tools. I mean, you showed us all, and sorting them out and figuring out what's kind of like, and just having some sort of a framework to kind of where things fall. I think it's human nature to want to organize things. And I think this is a really nice way of organizing it. And what I really appreciate about what you've done here is you were very honest about the pros and the cons, right? There isn't not a perfect, it's like, there's not a one size fits all silver bullet. I mean, there's pros and cons. And so I think that it was really helpful to kind of, hopefully for people who, if there's people who are still watching this video and stuck around, hopefully that aspect of it has been helpful to see and kind of go through that process of like, what can I use? What are the pros? What are the cons? Because I think that thought process, the way you've kind of synthesized it, is really nice.
Well, thanks so much. And again, it was fun to get to talk about this stuff. This is I enjoy getting to hear from other people and whatnot. So if there's anything that I missed, by the way, or any questions that if anything I can be helpful with after this, definitely feel free to reach out. I'll just happy to share more if it's helpful.
I love it.
Be careful, Matthew. Oh, Mohammed's asking if we can share the slides.
Oh yeah, sure. I'm actually going to put them on our blog tomorrow morning. So happy to send that over.
Oh,
if that's
sneak peek. We got a sneak peek performance.
There you go. Exactly.
We love that. Now all we need you to do is tell us about what's dropping as of today. You can now sync 3 tools.
Yes, you're going to be our hype man when we eventually do announce that.
You need a hype man. You got no-code. You got Webflow Twin Cities.
Webflow Minneapolis.
Webflow Minneapolis.
Can we see a little bit of Whalesync?
Sure. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
It would be great. I think I've seen a demo, but it would just be great to see you actually work with it a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let me pull it up. I love it.
Penny might want to have been one of our views on our YouTube.
Yes, I may have been.
That is amazing.
How about this? Matthew, after I posted the video, he sends me an email. He's like, hey, we were featured in the Webflow blog or in the Webflow email. That was awesome.
Yeah. Right. I mean, to be part
Yeah.
of the Webflow one's always fun.
Mhm.
That is pretty cool. That's a badge of honor.
Did you go through Product Hunt?
In terms of launching on Product
Yeah.
Hunt, not yet. We're gearing up for a launch in the fall winter is the goal.
Is that a big, I mean, it's obviously a big deal to get that much exposure, but is there like a lot of hoops you need to jump through?
Nope. So I've launched other things in the past. It's pretty easy, but it is hard to be in the top, 3 or however many top 5, right? And so we want to make sure that when we do it, we are ready to kind of nail the launch.
Nice.
Right. Well, and you want to have your community all dialed up to be there with you, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And in all honesty, like, we also want to make sure that the product is, it has the integration that people need, and so that when people finally come and see the site, that they are excited to sign up.
Mhm.
So yeah, let me go ahead and usually I prepare a whole set of apps. Unlike some of these other tools, there's like 3 different things to get ready here. But let me go ahead and set this up as quickly
Was I
as
reading,
can.
I think to kind of, I think I was reading this. Is it best when you're starting with Whalesync, is it best to have an empty collection that you're pushing into? Is that,
Yes, for that
or
first.
I suppose, or an empty base that you're pushing into one of the sides needs to be empty.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be. If you had different data in let's say we had some blog posts in Webflow and we had some different blog posts in Airtable, you could do a 2-way sync to start. But typically what people have is they have like one set of data, really, right? Like I have my blog posts in Airtable and I want them to be sent over to Webflow or vice versa. So it's cleaner to have one that's empty to
And then
start.
But
the fields are all mirrored. So you've set up your collection. So you've got all the fields you need. And then you've got your Airtable. It's got all the same fields. Are they named the exact, or no, you can map them. I've seen you map them, but so one's empty, but they have all the same fields. And then that makes life a lot easier.
Exactly. And I'll show it here. And definitely let me know, if there's anything in particular you want to see, or, but I'll just go really quickly through this. But basically here is a Webflow site. We've got a CMS set up with blog posts and authors and categories. So we come in here, right? We've got name of the blog post, an image, rich text, of course, no data in here yet. Over in this Airtable base, we've got the same fields, just like Kyle was saying. And so if we come into Whalesync, you can go ahead and go to the dashboard, hit create new base, choose the tools you want to integrate with. If you wanted to do Notion, right, or Webflow to Webflow, you can do that, right? But we'll do Airtable and Webflow.
What's a Webflow to Webflow example?
We actually haven't released that. This is a nice, not announcement, but we haven't we haven't opened up Webflow publicly yet. We're hoping to do that in the next week or 2. So I've got the very special version here. But so yeah, we haven't seen Webflow to Webflow or a ton of Webflow to Webflow use cases yet. But if, for example, you had 2 Webflow sites and you wanted to have them to each have the same CMS items but look different, you could sync the two of them.
Or I suppose if you just had a main business site and then subsidiary extension sites, although I suppose it would be, I don't know, I'll think on that one.
would it also be useful if you were transferring a site, like if you were going to rebuild it and you want to get the data over?
Ooh.
Yep, that's a great one as well. Exactly. And by the way, I'll say we've with these new integrations, every time we launch something, people come up with way cooler ideas for how to use it than we do. So we try not to be too prescriptive.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead, Penny.
I was going to say, I've seen people say, I was like, okay, so I've got this horrible site that I inherited from somebody and I want to rebuild it in client first. What's the best way to do it? Right. And it's like, perhaps using something like Whalesync to move the data would be a way of doing that, to get it into a clean site and then set it up. I don't know.
The thing on that, Penny, is that when we just updated the Christensen Group website, We had our old site that had employees and different things. And so then I wanted to keep the data. So I cloned the site and then just emptied everything out. But then what had happened is I was working on it for 2-3 months, and blogs
Stuff changed.
updated, employees updated. There were things that updated over here. So then before we launched, I had to go through the data and be like, okay, well, which employees haven't we added, which blogs? And so having that connected could almost bridge that gap while you're developing the new site. Probably couldn't add new fields. You'd have to add fields in both places, but I think that would have been really useful.
And just to clarify, when it says Webflow to Webflow, we're talking Webflow CMS to Webflow CMS, correct?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Okay. So just to go through this quickly here, and basically, idea is you connect to the two tools. For certain apps, we have OAuth, where you sign in with a username and password. With Airtable, we use their API keys. So you come in here. With Webflow, we're going to add OAuth very soon. Right now, we're using the API keys as well. So if you're familiar, you just come over to the settings, go to integrations, and generate an API key here, and paste it in. And so basically what will happen here, once you connect to the two tools, it'll pull up the data tables that are in each. So like I mentioned before, we have this authors table or authors collection over in Webflow, a blog post collection, and you can just map the two together. Here you can set the sync direction. Once you're ready, you hit continue. Same idea for the fields. It'll basically just pull up all the fields that are in your Webflow CMS and all the fields that are in your Airtable base. You can map those two together. If the names are the same, it'll map them for you. But if you want to do it manually, you can always just go ahead and do it like that. Once you're done mapping, you can hit complete. That will sort of finish setting that up there. It'll bring you back to the dashboard. And right here, this little toggle will turn syncing on. This is basically just saying what we talked about, or Kyle, you brought up, which is you want to have one of the two sides empty just to start, so it doesn't look like there are any duplicates. And you turn syncing on. This will initialize, and then in a few seconds, it'll start. There we go, 11 updates remaining. And basically, it'll just start to churn through all those syncs. Oh, I must have set something up wrong, let's say. Let's see, the data in the select field is not valid. So another feature here, if there is an issue, if Webflow doesn't like something that you did, Webflow threw this error here, which, let's see, Webflow told us that the field.slug is invalid. Whalesync will do its best to translate that into something human readable. So one of the slug fields here is not correct. And you can go ahead and get that fixed. And so if we go back to Airtable, we can find this one right here. So this is probably something I did on purpose before, but my blog post has an incorrect slug that broke the sync for that record. I can handle it. In the meantime, if we come back over to Webflow,
so when you deleted that record, because that was already turned on, it was listening and it just corrected it.
So exactly, I could have done, if I wanted to, I could have fixed the slug and then it would have synced it. Instead, I just deleted it. But either way, basically, now if we come back over here, and I assume this is the record I was talking about, and we retry this sync, this should remove that issue. And so back over in Webflow, we've got all these blog posts coming in, and everything is syncing. And if we don't have to do it, but if I went into here to Webflow and I added a new blog post, it'll sync back into Airtable since the two-way sync is on.
Cool.
And would
Can you show
happen before? You wouldn't have to go into Whalesync. It would just, it's in the process of syncing, and therefore if you were to add something now, it would. Okay, actually, this leads to my next question. Is it a constant thing? Like when it's switched on, the Whalesync two-way sync is switched on, and therefore the two-way syncing is happening every minute of every day up until you turn it off again?
Exactly.
Okay.
Unlike some other tools, right, it's more of like a push, like you press a button and then everything gets moved over. This is because we are trying to create that like true connection between these two tools. As long as this is toggled on, it is constantly trying to keep the two sets in sync so that they can really share one set of data.
Yeah. What's the lag time?
So we try to do as best as we can to be real time. We are limited by the API limits of some of these tools. So like Webflow, for example, the most you can do is 1 request per second. And so in general, I'd say the lag time for one record syncing over is like 2-3 seconds. If there's a bunch of records, right, it'll go one at a time. So if you had 100 records, it'll take a little bit of time to work through all of them, but any individual record should be pretty quick.
Mm.
Can you show the views thing in Airtable? This was kind of neat. I think that
Sure.
I missed. So
Yeah. So let me go ahead and grab here. So it's still working through the last of these updates here. I'm going to pause it for a second to go ahead and edit this, show you what Kyle's mentioned in here. But basically Airtable, again, I don't know if everyone's super familiar with Airtable, but it has this concept of views. And so let's say you wanted to just have a certain sets of records that we're going to be syncing into Webflow. This grid view right now has all my blogs. If I have a published view, maybe it's just the ones that I want to send to Webflow, these 6. What I can do over in Whalesync is, instead of syncing all records, turn this to one way and then make this a published view. And so now if we update this and that saved, come back over the dashboard, turn this on. Now what's going to happen is it's actually going to start removing all the records that aren't in this view.
Oh, wow.
And it'll just sync these 6.
I didn't realize it removed the ones that that's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Thanks.
That's cool, because there's been a lot of times where, like you were talking about, you're working through a blog, you're workshopping something, you're all commenting and you're not ready to set it live. But if you just create the record, where Whalesync is going to suck it right up and put it out there and put it live. And so having a way to kind of, it's almost like your way of manually pushing the button, right? It's not an actual, I mean, I guess you technically are pushing the button to like check it, but it's your way of having that one additional step of approval before things just go. And
Right.
that's I thought, yeah, I didn't pick up on that right away the first time you showed, and then I'd watched it after. I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty sweet.
Thanks.
So in your grid view, which is your basic view of everything, you can't put a condition on it to say if the field mark published is turned on, then publish it. It's like it's everything, or you do it in a view.
Exactly. So there's
That's the idea.
Yeah, there's another way. Basically, the general idea is that Whalesync is, in order to create that two-way sync where it's trying to keep 2 sets of data constantly in sync, it doesn't have like a filtering mechanism to say, well, only certain records, only this, because
Right.
it's just trying to keep the two exactly correct. And so yeah, either on the Airtable side, you can set up in this published view or some version of that and control it there. Or on the Webflow side, right, the other option would be sync everything into Webflow and then use, are you familiar with the conditional visibility on the CMS?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can sync everything and then put, let's say a publish check option in Webflow that's like only make the ones that are visible that have that option.
Right. Okay.
And in that case,
that way,
though, aren't they on the Webflow side, aren't the ones that aren't published, are they still loaded into the DOM, but they're just hidden?
Good question, actually. I don't think that's a good question. Let me double check that.
I think whenever you add a conditional visibility, it's after it's loading everything into the DOM, and then it's adding like hidden. To
yeah.
Yeah, I think you could be right.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good thing to find out. Let me check that.
Because I know that, like, if you have let's say you put a filter on something, you do something so that it's like, I'm going to load all my employees. What was it? We have all our employees, but we're only showing, how did we do that? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I think that's how it works, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely double check. That's a good thing to know.
Yeah.
So
What's the pricing right now?
Right now, the starter plan is $29 a month. That gets up to 2,000 records or 2,000 items in Webflow. If you need more, there's a next plan, which is $39 a month for 10,000.
Yeah.
and the 2000, there's no reason for there to be more records on one end than there is the other, right? Because it's a two-way sync.
Yeah, exactly. If you want it, it's only the records that are kept in sync. And so, if you only wanted the published view, then you don't have to count, all of them. But
As many connections, like as many of those, I can't remember what you called them, but as many of those, grid tiles. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, like let's say we have, certain agencies that use Whalesync, right? And so they'll set up one base for one client, and maybe that only uses 100, records. They could set up 10 of these across a bunch of clients and still just be on the starter plan.
Yep.
So the 3 main platforms that you have ready right now, it's Notion, Webflow plus Airtable. Is Webflow the web development tool of choice you have included in here because you really, really like Webflow, or was there any other reasoning going into that being the one that you want to tailor this to in its early days?
Yeah, so a couple pieces of that. One is we started with Webflow mainly because the problem that we heard the most was this Airtable Webflow sync that people wanted to do. So like we figured let's solve that problem and then we'll expand to other tools.
You read the support forums.
Yes, exactly. We followed your advice. That being said, Webflow, has been an amazing first partner for us. We use Webflow for our own site. We use Airtable plus Whalesync plus Webflow to create programmatic SEO pages.
Nice.
So just to give you, just to there's example. One day we have to do a blog post on this, but if you come to our website and you look at our integrations and you look at Airtable, so each of these is a programmatic SEO page. So this is our Airtable plus Webflow page. And so we have hundreds of these that are created for every combination of tool. And it's all really easy because we use, Airtable, Webflow.
Are you telling me that if I were to is when you say programmatic SEO, are you telling me that if I were to go into if I go into Google and say, how do I sync this tool with this tool, this page gets generated in accordance with my search criteria?
Well, it gets generated and then it's trying to match your search criteria. So if we Google,
it's not generated on the fly. It's loaded on their site, but they're trying to.
But is it loaded via CMS? It's not a static page. It's a
CMS page.
Okay, so it is kind of being compiled in accordance with the search terms.
Right. We're basically
compiling.
Yeah, we're looking for search terms, and then we're creating CMS pages that we think might match those terms. So okay. Yeah, if you Google how to sync Airtable Webflow, we now come up here.
Matthew, I could talk to you all day.
Well, this is such a blast to get to talk with you guys.
So you have 3 tools. How are you creating hundreds of pages?
Yeah, it's so for now, basically we have pages created for every tool that we plan on integrating with. So we're going to add a Google Sheets integration, we're going to add a Shopify integration, and today if you come here, it'll say, basically that they're coming soon, and as opposed to the other ones where you can just sign up if we have the integration.
I see. So you've got 15 tools and 15 tools and every permutation of that. I see.
That's exactly. So 15 tools is something that, we'll probably build in the next 6 months, 12 months, right? Something like that. But it generates, hundreds of these programmatic pages because of all the potential combinations.
All right.
That's great.
Thanks.
Are you seeing an uptick in your site traffic as a result of it?
For sure. And I think, what's helpful is we get not just random traffic, but people that are actually interested in a tool like Whalesync. You know, if you are searching how to connect Airtable and Webflow, that's like a really valuable visitor as opposed to just someone that's interested in, you know, who knows.
No code.
And it's a great way to plan what you build next, because it's like, hey, we've had 50 people look for this integration and 10 look for this other one. We'll start with the 50.
But that's exactly how we chose Notion as our next integration. Is we have, you know, that data that was like people really wanted Notion next.
Did you launch your Airtable to Airtable yet?
No, that's going to come out with the Webflow to Webflow one again,
Okay.
hopefully in about a week or two. Although I should probably never say a specific date, so you know, it's recorded.
I had a situation. I was like, when would you ever use Webflow Airtable to Airtable? And then I had a situation. I was like, I want this right now. I want so because you know the use case there is you have normally right now you have like a synced base, and so you like sync over, and then you can't update that base, and so yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that one. Airtable users like Webflow users are super passionate, and so yeah, it's interesting to see what they do.
The Airtable following is like loud.
It is. What do you think are the loudest no-code tools when it comes to supporters? I think Webflow's up there, Airtable's up there. I'm curious what you think. What else is up there?
I have a strong opinion here, which is that I feel like the communities take on a specific identity, and so like Webflow people tend to be more design centric, but the one that sticks out to me is like bubblers. They are very what's the word? Confident that Bubble is the best tool out there. Yeah, but it's like, oh, once I found Bubble, like that was every other tool. What was I doing?
That's very true. I have to say I don't use Bubble, and I don't I don't intentionally follow people who use Bubble on like Twitter and stuff, but I still hear from them. They still get on my feed. Like
you know, they're so confident that Bubble is right. I haven't seen these people, so I'm sure they're great, but I'm confident that they're wrong. Like Bubble, to me, we had a Bubble demo on here.
Yeah, like a year ago now, yeah.
And I remember walking away from it going, I hope I never have to use Bubble. I'm sorry, like I'm gonna get canceled, but this is maybe I just haven't, you know, I need to spend a little more time with it. But I thought it was so like convoluted, how you had to do everything. And it was like, I was so used to just a visual development experience with Webflow. And I understand there's a lot more logic going on with Bubble. So it's really hard to just, you know, do what they're trying to do all visually. But I felt like Bubble was really, the learning curve there was far greater than any no-code tool I've seen. And I even think that the learning curve on Webflow is extremely high, you know, for you know, for certain people. So
that actually makes me think of another question. Do you envision this being a purely no-code tool until the end of time, or do you have ideas or like things in your head that make you think that maybe some coding may be necessary for some things?
Yeah, so the way we think about it is, and I think there's a guy named David Peterson who coined this, but I really like, is at the bottom end, we really want to have a low barrier to entry product. So like Airtable, Notion, right? You can get in and very quickly get value. But at the other end of it, we want to have a high ceiling. So like you can not only get value early, but continue to find new ways to use the tool. And so if being no code is ever sort of like a limit to the ceiling of that product, then I could imagine us, you know, eventually adding ways for developers to take it to the next level. But I think we very much want to start from a no code first perspective, which is like anyone should be able to do really amazing things without having to write code. But we just don't want to limit developers if that ever, you know, becomes the case.
You know, the crazy thing about your tool is it truly, like, once you go through the 5-minute setup, unless something breaks, you don't touch it, you don't use it, you don't see it. It's like, it's just completely invisible. And there's a real, that's a position of power right there, because if you are doing that and no one, and people really don't have to worry about that. If someone comes and like, should we keep spending this money on this product, or should we do this or not? You know, like, once they've invested and they've started doing it, to all of a sudden pull that out, and then like, and now you got to go rebuild that yourself, and you're going to probably hear about it more because zaps always break, and you know, you're going to have to learn how to, you know, and it's not going to be two-way, it's only going to be, you know, like, once you're in, it feels like, unless like the use case goes away, they're like, oh, we're doing that for this one site and now we're done. But like, if it's a site that is updated with, you know, that is maintained with any regularity, or a database or whatever, I don't know why, because you're invisible and it's so simple and easy and it just works, I don't know why anyone would stop using it. You know, I think there's a fear there that people would say, I don't know. You know?
And that's very much the goal. I mean, we want to be super simple. We want to be, you know, just making it work in the background. And you're basically right, which is that the people that have stopped using Whalesync really fall into two categories, which is one, you know, my use case no longer exists, and you know, for us, like, that's great, and hopefully, you know, next time around we're you know, still think about Whalesync. And then on the other side is I wasn't able to get set up. It was, you know, for whatever reason, my thing was complicated and I couldn't figure out XYZ. And so we're just doing more and more on our side to make that easier and easier. And so that becomes less of an issue. You know, for example, like what I showed before with that issues, you know, before the issues would come in and they'd be, you know, just exactly what Webflow, you know, sent. And that sometimes was very developer-y. And so now we added a feature where it translates that into, you know, human readable information. And so, you know, that's just, you know, something to make it a little bit easier for just anyone, even if you're not a developer, to get set up and figure it out, you know, not run into any road bumps.
Yeah, that's great.
Would you ever consider, one of the things that I find frustrating with tools is sometimes I need a tool. I don't have like constant need for a tool. I need a tool for a specific use case, a specific time period, and then it's going to be done. It's kind of sort of what you've been talking about. But would you ever consider doing like you just need a service for, you know, for this time, and just do a one-off purchase of time, or, you know, X number of records or something like that? Because it's always frustrating. It's like, I know it's like, I don't need it for a year. I don't need it for, I may not need it for a month. I need to do a particular sync, and then I'm done.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, so we've thought about different things like that. So for example, yeah, I want to migrate from one tool to the next, right? And so that's a one-time thing. So far we haven't, you know, implemented anything like that. One thing I will say that we do want to implement eventually is a freemium tier, or free, you know, free tier. And so the idea being that someone could come in, use it, get value from it, downgrade to the free tier when they don't need it, and then, you know, spin it back up easily when they do. And so we're hoping that kind of solves that. But no, I think that's a really good point.
If you subscribe for, you do the monthly thing, and then you decide you don't want to use it anymore, are you just like, you just turn, I still have my account, but you just stop the sync?
Exactly. So yeah, if you no longer need it anymore, then you can always come back, and you know, nothing's going to be like your data won't be deleted, but it just, it won't be syncing actively anymore.
So Penny, let's say you needed to sync a site, and you're like, I just need this for like, I've got data, I need to sync it, I want it to be, I need this for like 3 days. Would you pay a daily fee? Would you pay like, it's $7 a day? If you just need quick, it's $7. Now you realize that if you're on the daily and you keep going, it could end up being a lot more money, but like, you're like, I need it for 1 day. I'd pay $7 to do that. That's going to save me so much time. I'd pay.
Sure. I mean, if I'd pay more than $7, if, you know, if it was, you know, if I knew that it was going to do what I needed it to do, and then I could just let it go. I mean, yes, as long as you can, you know, it's just that it's like there are some tools where it's like, well, you just have to delete your account because there is no free version, or there is no I'm not using this right now version. And then you're kind of like, well, that was a lot of work for a few minutes of you know, saving my bacon, but yeah.
I've done that before where I've been like, oh, I need to sync this thing. I need to do this. And then I'm just like,
Yeah.
what do I
And
do?
then you just find another way of doing it, and which takes 4 times as long. And, you know, because I could have used this a couple of weeks ago when I was moving my current client site over. Although,
Nice.
you know, I just do a lot of uploads of CSV files, and then it's done.
Right.
Wow. Anything else? I don't want to, you know, Matthew's got a new house he's got to go, you know, unpack for. Penny's on, she's on
Canadian time.
Eastern Toronto time.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
But this has been great, Matthew. Really appreciate it. We'll we'll trim it up and then get it on YouTube. And then if you want to, we'll share it out to our people. You can share it with yours, and hopefully you get some traction, because I think the content of this was well worth. Very great.
Yeah.
Well, again, yeah, thanks so much
Great.
for having me on. And yeah, super excited. Just let me know whatever, if you want to, we'll tweet it out. We'll do whatever is helpful. We'd love to, again, spread the word for you guys as well.
Well, there's so much to think about here. I'm kind of thinking I want to have like a Minneapolis meetup, Matthew 2.0, where you just talk about all the aspects of this business and website.
Well,
Like,
I'm happy to, when we launch three-way sync, I think that could be a good
I know. I was
time.
gonna say, if we're gonna be your hype people, you know.
I don't mind being a hype person for this. I feel like I would use this. It's really digestible in terms of like, oh yeah, that would work here. This would be useful in this way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought of one question that's totally separate from this that I was just curious about. What is Raymar doing now? Raymar?
Yeah.
What's he up to?
What he left?
State of flow.
What?
Yeah, he's state of flow.
Oh, that's his full-time thing now.
Well, it's not a full-time thing. That's the first event that you know he's sort of doing. He's looking at ways of building community. He's got a whole bunch of ideas, and he's sort of got some stuff that he's been thinking about for years of, you know, and he wants to start kind of doing more with those ideas. I think it's a lot of what he's
he was
doing.
like, big news on the stream today. We're going to talk about big things, blah, 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 blah. You'll never believe. And I could never go during the day, and so I couldn't make it. And then I didn't see what the big news was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I like your impression.
Yeah, well, like this is what I assume that he's saying when he's typing. He's like, guys. He actually doesn't use his arms a lot, I don't think.
He does. Yeah, sometimes.
That's good. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, everyone, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. This was fantastic.
Great.
Matthew, wonderful job. And we can't wait to see you at the three-way sync, hype party.
Amazing. Well, great to meet everybody, and yeah, good to see you again, Kyle.
Great.
Good to see you guys. Thank you very
Thanks.
much, Matthew. That was excellent.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh.